they're plugged, they seem to be completely dead, and then because of barrier deterioration, they began to leak. Now, Hawk mentioned, and he's absolutely right, that these wells are starting to leak at the surface, but the problem is they can also leak downhole between
Mm.
from one interval to another, and that is probably as serious a problem as we have with the surface leaks, and it's pretty widespread from what we've seen, and that's going to continue in time as these barrier systems that were originally installed continue to deteriorate.
So do you have an idea of kind of what the scope of the problem is? And there's I don't even know. I don't even know how many wells there are in Texas. There's got to be a huge, huge number. I mean, we got to be talking hundreds of thousands, right? How many? Do we have an idea of what kind of percentage of these wells you'd kind of classify as zombie wells, problem wells?
No, Wade, and the problem is we are just now beginning to identify where the zombies are, and the reason is they're coming to the surface, and we can
Right.
spot them. We have no idea how many of those wells are leaking downhole. There are currently about 2 million orphaned wells in Texas. Now, if you just look at that number and say, well, how many old plugged wells are actually leaking somewhere? We're probably in the same number range, but it's just a guess since we really haven't done a statewide survey on the number of leaking wells that may exist.
I got
And
you.
there's wells, and I've been saying it for the last few years. There's wells in Texas that God doesn't know about. And back in the day, folks would drag a rig out and they drill a hole, and if they didn't hit, they just skid the rig over and drill another one, and they wouldn't file for a permit or anything like that. I've tripped over 8 5/8 at surface, and there's no record. You can dig and dig and dig in the archives. We've had people in the archives down in Austin and looking for records for this, and there's nothing. And I was fortunate enough to meet a man in Crane who had actually worked around here his whole life, and he's the one told me the story. He said, "Oh yeah," I said, we'd drill a well. If it hit, we'd send somebody down to Austin and get a permit. And then, if it didn't hit, we'd just move the rig and try another
Yeah.
one. So, that was what they were doing back in the day. So
Yeah.
there's no real, you can't put a number to, how
It's
many.
hard to quantify.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard. It's really hard to quantify because of, historic practices.
What's been the response from operators whenever something like this happens? I mean, I imagine you kind of get a wide range of responses, but generally, what's the response like there?
Usually denial. That's the first point. It's not our well. We don't know anything about it. We don't know where it is. We don't have any records on it. They're probably telling the truth. They don't have any records on it. In as Hawk just mentioned, some of these wells were drilled, and if it turned out to be a dry hole, they just moved the rig over 3, 4, 500 feet and drilled another hole,
Mhm.
hoping to hit something. And if it did, then there were some records created. On that first well, there may not be anything at all. And
I got you.
there's another
Yeah.
issue, and that is that states started to regulate the oil and gas industry back in the 1920s. The last state was Indiana. It didn't start regulating wells until 1946. So that may give you an idea of the number of wells that have been drilled,
Mhm.
because the oil and gas industry in the United States goes back to before the Civil War, and there are absolutely no records on some of those wells at all. There was no permitting system. There was no regulatory agency that managed them. So it's difficult to go back and say, well, we know there's a well here. No, we don't have a clue.